of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the story of Joseph. We knew him as the spoiled younger brother who tormented his older brothers, constantly following them around and getting in their business. And then he was also his favorite of his father's, and so he rubbed that in any chance he got. He paraded around in front of them with this really nice coat that his dad got for him, and he said, "Father loves me so much that he gave me this special coat." And he claimed to them that he had had a dream, and that one day he would be so important that they would bow down to him. Now, I don't know about you, but I had a younger brother and a younger sister. And I can identify with the older brothers and understand what they were thinking. You know, this guy is a real pest. And as he got older, he got worse instead of better. Joseph led a very easy life. He was loved, he was cared for. He thought his life would always be like that. He didn't realize, as he went out one day to give his brothers a hard time and report back to his dad and tattle on them, that things were just about to change in his life dramatically. Because on that day, you see, the older brothers had just finally had enough. And they decided that they were going to show him who was the big brothers. And so they picked him up and they tossed him into an empty well. They had cisterns that they dug in the ground so that when the rains came, the wells would fill up and they could take water out to feed the animals. So there was this big dry cistern, and they just said, "This is a good place for him," and they tossed him down in there. Now the older brother thought, when my brothers calm down a little bit, I'll go back and get Joseph out and take him home to dad, and everything will be fine. What he didn't know that day is that traders were coming through the country, and that the brothers got to talking to the traders, and they said they wouldn't mind having a couple of slaves. Well, those brothers said, "Oh, this is a good way to get rid of Joseph." And so they sold him to the traders that came through that day. Rather than allowing his brothers to kill him, God gave him a way to escape. But it was not an easy way. Joseph, you see, traveled from there to Egypt. And when he got to Egypt, he was traded into the house of Potiphar. And he became there a servant. And he did so well that eventually he worked his way up and became an agent, a head agent. He worked hard. He showed skill, he showed cunning, he showed wisdom, and he advanced quickly. And he was also a handsome young man, and about that time Potiphar's wife took an interest in him. And she decided that one day she would marry him, and that he was the one who would be there to relieve her boredom. But Joseph, because of the way he was raised, refused her. He said, "I can't dishonor Potiphar this way." And so he tried to get out of the room. She grabbed the coat and he ran out the door. And so the lady went to her husband, you remember, to Potiphar, and said, "Joseph attacked me." And so Potiphar believed his wife, and he had Joseph thrown into prison. While he was in prison, the head of the prison decided that Joseph was such a good leader that he made him the leader over the other prisoners. And one day, there came in the head butler and the head baker of Pharaoh, who, for whatever reason, maybe it was the wife again, who knows, were thrown into prison. This was a very sad day for them, and Joseph said, "Why are you guys so sad?" And they said, "Well, we're in prison, but not only that, we have these terrible dreams and we don't understand what they mean." And Joseph said to them, "Well, all dreams are given by God, so tell me what your dream is, and maybe God will show me the answer." And so he prayed about that, and the men shared the dream, and the butler shared his dream, and Joseph said, "Your dream means that in 3 days, Pharaoh will reinstate you to your old position. And when he does, I want you to share with him my story." So the baker was so excited about that he said, "Let me share my dream with you." And he shared his dream with Joseph, and Joseph said, "I'm sorry, but your dream means that in 3 days you will be executed." An interpretation of those two dreams, he was right. He was a true prophet because what he said came to pass. After that then, of course, one man was dead, and the chief butler was promptly back at work in the Pharaoh's palace. He quickly forgot about his time in prison and about Joseph's request that when he got back with Pharaoh, he would mention that Joseph was still in prison and maybe he could get him out of there. And he went on his way. It's interesting to me that Joseph, after this man left, spent 2 years in prison, knowing that the head butler knew he was there and had promised that he would do whatever he could to set him free. I wonder if he didn't wake up some mornings right away and say, okay, today is the day I will be free again. Today is the day the butler will say something to Pharaoh and he'll come and release me, or he'll send someone to release me, and I'll be out of here. Day after day he woke up, and he thought about that. And then I wonder how long it was before he woke up and said, this is never going to happen. You know, you and I get so discouraged sometimes, and we say, Lord, I just don't believe the good things that you told me are really going to come to pass. And Joseph began to think, well, maybe he won't come. Maybe I will never be set free. And I think he probably began at that time to lose hope. Often we make plans for the future, and we, in our human minds, forget that God might have other plans for us, and that we need to be patient, and that we need to be waiting to hear about him and his plans, and to find out where he wants us to lead, and that we need to never lose hope. We need to know that God is in control, and that our God is a good God.
Amen.
So Joseph continued to serve Potiphar in the prison, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited. And then the Pharaoh began to have dreams, and he tried every way he knew to find out the meanings of the dreams. All day the chief butler brought wise men and magicians into the presence of Pharaoh, and then escorted them out again as they could not tell Pharaoh the understanding of the meaning of the dreams that he was dreaming. But sometime during that, as he brought this man in and took that man out and brought this man in and that man out, he remembered that there was a man in prison that had translated his dream for him. And he said, maybe I should share that information with Pharaoh. So, as he was bringing one man out, he said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, you have a young man in prison named Joseph, and he interprets dreams. And the Pharaoh was so desperate at this point that he said, have Joseph brought to the palace, and let me see if he really can interpret dreams. So he had Joseph brought, and Joseph stood before him and said, Joseph, can you tell me what my dream means? And Joseph said, no. And Pharaoh says, what? Joseph said to him, God is the only one that can tell the meaning of your dream. But if you allow me the time, I will pray and ask God what your dream means. You see, Joseph had remembered the teachings of his father from all the way back in the good days. And he honored God in his life. He honored God with his life choices. And so I want to ask you this morning, how are you honoring God? Are you giving God honor and glory as you make decisions in your day-to-day life? As you decide where you will go, what you will say to people, how you will react in situations? Are you honoring God, or are you not? See, Joseph realized that God was the one who was in control of everything. And he was willing to learn whatever it was that God wanted to teach him. That's a hard lesson for most of us. We want our lives to be easy. We want things to go smoothly. We don't want there to be hard times, and for sure when hard times come, we want God to just take them away. And we don't learn that sometimes in the difficult places, God speaks to us in a special way. And we learn a way that we can honor him when we share in somebody else's life as they go through the same situation. So do you see the hand of God in the difficult times in your life? And when they come, you say, Lord, what is it you're trying to teach me? I have a best friend, and she and I talk sometimes about the things that God brings back again and again to us. And we say, you know, I thought I had learned that lesson, but I find that God has to remind me every now and then again that he is in control and that I can trust him because he is a good God. So Pharaoh shared his dreams with Joseph, and Joseph shared the two dreams that were to tell him and began to tell him the same thing. It's interesting that God gave Joseph the dreams and the meanings. And Joseph then went and shared with Pharaoh. He said, for the next 7 years, the crops will be really good, and there will be an abundance of produce in the land. But after that 7 years, nothing will grow, and there will be nothing. So Joseph advised the Pharaoh to put the wisest man he knew in charge of saving food during the good times, and then handing it out, of course, in the bad years. And Pharaoh decided that the wisest man that he knew was Joseph. And so he brought him out of prison, and he made him the second most important man in Egypt. And he began to build warehouses and to warehouse food and to save. For 7 years, he put every bit of food that he could possibly put into these warehouses. And sure enough, at the end of that 7 years, the famine came. Just as God had said in the dream he gave Pharaoh, it got so bad that everyone was dependent on the food that Joseph had stocked away in those warehouses. And even in the outlying areas around them, where the countries around them, it got so bad that in Joseph's home country, they heard that there was food in Egypt. And so his brothers went to buy food. Eventually, Joseph revealed himself to his brothers and suggested that they come to Egypt with his father and that they live there so that he could take care of them. And so they did. And that worked out well until the day that Jacob died. The brothers were sure that now that Dad was gone, Joseph would get rid of them and get even for what they had done to him so many years ago. In verse 18 it says, that his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. And Joseph said, don't be afraid. Am I to stand in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is to this day, and to save many, many people from a certain death. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and for your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke calmly to them. Joseph had true faith in God. He looked at all the good things in his life, his childhood, how he was raised. He remembered the bad things when his brothers threw him down in that well, and he was like, how do I ever get out of here? And he remembered the traders and their rough treatment as they drug him across the country. He remembered the times that he served in Potiphar's house, the good times, and the bad times as he was in prison. And through that all, he knew that ultimately God was the one in control, and that God had a plan for his life. His brothers still didn't understand that. And they were sure that now that the father was gone, their level of protection was gone, that they would die, that Joseph would take it out on them and he would have them executed. But he said, you meant to do evil, but God, a good God, meant it to be good, and so it was good.
Amen.
Can we say that about the hard times in our lives? As other people are mean to us or say or do things that would hurt us, can we say, they meant it for evil, but God can do good here if I allow it? Are we slow to be angry and quick to pray for the people that would abuse us and would hurt us and would trample us? Can we say, God is in control and God is a good God? Do we have the faith of Joseph? Joseph dwelt in Egypt in his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. And then he died. And he was gone. So the book of Genesis ends with Joseph's dying. And the book of Exodus makes a very interesting statement. Now, as Joseph died, all his brothers and all that generation, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was built of them because God blessed them. And then in verse 8 of Exodus 1 it says, then there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He didn't know the man who believed that God was good and recognized that God was in control. Egypt became a nation that forgot about the power of God. They thought they were the most powerful people in the land. They enslaved people. They took people where they want. They overthrew governments. They led and they took over, but they didn't recognize that God was the one who was in control. They didn't remember Joseph. They didn't remember this man who came and taught them that there was a good God who loved them and who had a plan for them. When I read this statement there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, I think of our country and what it has become. Many people today do not know Joseph. They don't realize that God is good and that God is in control, even in the hard times. But we, as a people of faith, know that. We know that Joseph, like Joseph, we know that God is in control. We know that we can trust him, that he's a good God, and we know that he has a plan and that he will carry us through the difficult days when we're just like, what on earth is going on? We can say, Father, your will be done. To know that God is ultimately in control and that he is at work in our lives is the most wonderful thing that as Christians we can live. If we can live with that truth, that God is in control and he's a good God, and allow him to control our lives, then we will see wonderful things happen in the days ahead.
I'm going to do it a little bit different today. I'm going to ask for us all to come up and gather around the altar, hold hands, and acknowledge that God is in control.